Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
That's enough compliance. It's coming out to midday here. Prime Minister's question's on its way. It's the Deputy Speaker, Lindsay Hoyle, is in the hot seat today. We're all looking forward to that. John Bercow has a sadder event to attend. He's at the funeral of the former Speaker, Michael Martin, so can't be in Westminster. Laura Kunsberg, of course, is here as always. And you were saying just before we came on, you thought Mr Corbyn may, I emphasise, go on Brexit.
Well, there's a sense in Westminster with the Tory slanging match, basically, over the customs arrangements after 2020, that a lot of these contradictions unresolved in government are coming to a head. The European summit is at the end of June. There's 2 or 3 weeks.
Ambiguity is no longer an option.
Well, and ambiguity is no longer constructive. I mean, it is a principle in politics that lots of parties, both sides this time, hide behind constructive ambiguity because it can allow you to get through the day. Basically, not making your mind up can be politically quite a smart tactic.
He's the Deputy Speaker, so we're starting
be on
on time.
then.
Let's go straight over to the House of Commons and Prime Minister's questions.
The whole House are with the family and friends of Michael Martin. Mr Deputy Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Drew Hendry.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Many Highland businesses rely on EU national employees simply to operate. Given that her government already makes a charge of up to £1,000 per year per person for non-EU nationals, will she categorically rule out any such immigration skills charge for EU nationals after the UK leaves the EU?
Prime Minister.
We recognise that after the United Kingdom leaves the European Union, there will still be those from the EU who wish to come and work and study here in the UK. There will still be UK citizens who wish to work and study in the European Union, and we'll bring forward our proposals for those arrangements in due course.
Ray Caulfield.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Does the Prime Minister think that it was the Labour Party voting against 69,000 first-time buyers with the abolition of stamp duty, or the Labour Party voting against 50,000 extra school children getting free school meal, that convinced local voters in elections last year to vote Conservative as the only party on their side? And that's why the Conservatives retain control of Westminster and Wandsworth Council, and it's why they gain control in places like Redditch, Basildon and Barnet.
Can I just say, it's not the Prime Minister's responsibility for the Labour Party, but I'm sure she'll be able to get an answer. Prime Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, but I can say to my honourable friend that she is right about votes that took place in this House, where the Labour Party did vote, the opposition did vote against the abolition of stamp duty for those young first-time buyers, which is proving so helpful. But last Thursday, what we saw, when millions of people across England went to the polls to vote for their local councils, was that the real winners were ordinary people, because more people are now able to get the benefit of Conservative councillors who keep their council tax low and provide good local services.
Jeremy Corbyn, Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. First of all, Mr Deputy Speaker, could I put on record my thanks to Mr Speaker for attending the funeral of the late Michael Martin on behalf of this House this morning in Glasgow. Does the Prime Minister agree with her Foreign Secretary that the plan for a customs partnership set out in her Lancaster House speech is in fact crazy?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman, we are leaving the European Union, we are leaving the customs union, but of course, for our future trade arrangements, a trade relationship with the European Union, we will need to agree customs arrangements, which will ensure that we leave the customs union, that we can have an independent free trade policy, that we can maintain no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, and that we have as frictionless trade with the European Union as possible. And I'll tell the right honourable gentleman what's crazy. What's crazy is a leader of the opposition who for years opposed TTIP and now has a policy that would mean Labour signing up to TTIP with no say in it whatsoever.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, could the Prime Minister explain why she and her cabinet wasted weeks working up proposals that the EU said was unworkable, the Foreign Secretary described as crazy, and does she agree with her business secretary, who apparently backs the crazy customs partnership proposal, but made it clear he doesn't back a technological alternative when he told the BBC that jobs would be at risk if we don't sort out a comprehensive customs deal?
What the business secretary said on Sunday was that it was absolutely right that we should be leaving the customs union. And if the right honourable gentleman wants to talk about jobs, I'm happy to talk about jobs. Half a million jobs lost under the last Labour government, record employment rate under this Conservative government.
Jeremy Corbyn! Mr. Speaker, the government says it has two options. The Foreign Secretary says one is crazy. Sir Ivan Rogers, our former EU ambassador, said that the technological alternative is a fantasy island unicorn model. They have two options, neither of which are workable. The case for a new customs union with the European Union is clear: to support jobs and living standards. Why is the Prime Minister ignoring all the major business organisations, all the major trade unions in backing a customs union? Isn't it time she stood up to those described last night by the Father of the House as these wild right-wing people?
Prime Minister!
We are leaving the customs union. What we are doing is ensuring that we deliver customs arrangements that leave the customs union, that ensure no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, as frictionless trade with the EU as possible, and an independent trade policy. But what would Labour give us? They want to go into a customs union with the European Union, with no say over trade policy, with Brussels negotiating trade deals in their interest, not our own. The Labour manifesto said they wanted to strike trade deals. Now they've gone back on that policy. Typical Labour, letting Britain down once again.
Jeremy Corbyn! Mr. Speaker, she presides over a divided cabinet. She's had 23 months. She has had 23 months in order to negotiate an agreement and hasn't made any progress on it. The CBI says a comprehensive customs union after transition is a practical, real-world answer. The TUC, on behalf of 6 million workers in this country, put it simply, ruling out a customs union risks jobs. The government continues to reject a new customs union, but at the weekend the business secretary made clear that neither of their options would be ready to be implemented by December 2020. So can the Prime Minister tell us what is her preferred option and on what date it will be ready to be implemented?
Minister. Well, the right honourable gentleman talks about the length of time in the negotiations. Of course, it wasn't until March and the agreement to move on to the next stage of negotiations that it was possible to have discussions with the European Commission on the customs arrangements. There are two options. There are two options that were in my Mansion House speech. Questions have been raised about both of those options, and further work continues. But I just say, if I may say this to the right honourable gentleman, he has spent an entire career opposing a customs union. Now, when the British people want to come out, he wants to stay in. I know he's leader of the opposition, but that's going a bit far.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Mr. Speaker, due to divisions within the government, these negotiations are in a shambles. And this House is being denied the opportunity to debate crucial legislation affecting the future of our economy and communities all over Britain. So can the Prime Minister now tell the House when we will debate the trade bill and when we will debate the customs bill? She's had 23 months in order to get ready for it.
Minister!
The right honourable gentleman talks about the state of the negotiations. The right honourable gentleman talked about the state of the negotiations. Before December, he was saying that the negotiations weren't going to get anywhere. What did we get? A joint report agreed by the European Council. He said before March we wouldn't get what we wanted in the negotiations. What did we get? An implementation and an agreement with the European Union Council. We're now in negotiation for the best deal for the UK when we leave the EU, and we will get the best deal for the UK when we leave the European Union.
Prime Minister.
3 months we'd had a better answer than that from the Prime Minister. Mr. Deputy Speaker, how can they negotiate in the future interests of people's jobs and living standards when Cabinet members are more interested in putting their own futures first? Fundamentally, Mr. Deputy Speaker, how can this government negotiate a good deal for Britain to defend people's jobs and living standards when they're unable to reach an agreement within themselves?
Prime Minister.
I'll tell this, the right honourable gentleman, what this government has been doing to defend jobs. A balanced approach to the economy opposed by the Labour Party. Changes in legislation to more workers' rights, often opposed by the Labour Party. We have been ensuring that we see the jobs being created in this country. Employment rate at its highest rate since records began. What we are seeing in relation to the unemployment rate is at its lowest rate for 40 years or more. This is a government that is putting jobs first at every stage of what we are doing. And last week, what we saw up and down this country, whether in Barnet or Dudley or Peterborough, was the British people voting to reject the Back to the Future economic policy of the Labour Party and the broken promises of Labour. They don't trust Labour and they don't trust their leader.
Jeremy Quinn! Thank you, sir. Under this government, the introduction of a total cost cap on payday lending has more than halved the number of people with problem payday loans that are unmanageable. Would my right honourable friend agree that now is the moment for the FCA to push this out and to extend that same successful policy to impact and confront doorstep lending?
Prime Minister.
Can I say to my honourable friend, and I know he has been campaigning hard for the issues of financial inclusion, and that's very important, and he's working hard to promote that. And we are committed to ensuring that consumers are protected from unfair lending practices. I understand the FCA is currently conducting a review of the high-cost credit market, including doorstep lending, and will be publishing an update later this month. And of course, we've given the FCA new powers to cap the cost of credit, and they'll do so if they believe it's necessary to protect consumers.
Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We all woke up this morning to a much more dangerous world. Donald Trump has undermined progress towards normalisation of relationships with Iran. Can the Prime Minister tell us, in her representations to the President on Saturday, did she speak in the strongest terms on the lunacy of the actions that the President of the United States is taking?
Prime Minister.
I have been very clear in a number of conversations with the President of the United States about the belief of the United Kingdom that the JCPOA, the nuclear deal with Iran, should stay. That is also the view that is shared by Chancellor Merkel of Germany and President Macron of France. And that was made clear in the joint statement that I issued last night with Chancellor Merkel and with President Macron. We accept that there are other issues in relation to the behaviour of Iran that need to be dealt with. Ballistic missiles, the question of what would happen at the sunset clause at the end of the nuclear deal, and the destabilising activity of Iran in the region. Those are issues that need to be addressed, and we are working with our European and other allies to do just that.
Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The Prime Minister, of course, didn't make any reference to sending her Foreign Secretary to appear on Fox News as part of his foreign policy initiative. Pleading with the President through Fox News rather than through direct intervention. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Middle East is in need of stability. Conflicts are already raging in Yemen, Syria and Iraq. Meanwhile, the Foreign Secretary can't deliver a foreign message abroad in the correct manner. Whilst at home, the Foreign Secretary undermines the Prime Minister on the Customs Union. Prime Minister, can you tell us when the Foreign Secretary will agree with her own government's position? And if not, will she have the backbone to send him to the back benches?
Prime Minister.
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman that it is absolutely right that government, in addressing the issue of the Iran nuclear deal with the United States government, worked across all levels and made representations at a variety of levels and in a variety of ways. That's what the Foreign Secretary was doing in Washington. It is what he has done with his opposite number in the past, as I have done with President Trump, as has happened with our French and German colleagues as well. We continue to believe that the Iran nuclear deal was an important step forward in helping to keep the world safe. And as I say, there are other issues that need to be worked on, and both I and the Foreign Secretary will be continuing to work on those with our European and other allies.
Julian Stanley.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Over the bank holiday weekend, spectators turned out in record-breaking numbers to watch the Tour de Yorkshire, enjoying the county's finest hospitality with images of the UK's most beautiful countryside beamed to millions around the world. Does the Prime Minister agree that major sporting events like the Tour de Yorkshire provide significant economic benefits and investment in our regions, and will she join me in God's own county for next year's event?
Prime Minister.
Well, can I say to my honourable friend, it was indeed very good to see millions of people on the roads of Yorkshire cheering on the Tour de Yorkshire as it took place this bank holiday weekend. As he says, these events are not only hugely enjoyable for sports fans, but they also bring huge economic benefit to the area. And they show off the best of Britain in the world, and that's why I'm delighted that next year we'll also see Cycling Road World Championships taking place in Yorkshire next September, bringing the world's best cyclists to Yorkshire, and we're providing financial support for these championships, and I'm always happy to visit Yorkshire.
Deirdre Brock.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. My constituent was born in Kirkcaldy to parents who have the right to stay in the UK indefinitely. His entire life has been in Scotland, his schooling, university, and now his professional work as a structural engineer, but he can't get a British passport. He tells me he fears the knock on the door that so many Windrush people heard. Can the Prime Minister assure my constituent and the many people like him, whose cases are analogous to the Windrush people, that they will get the same consideration and be assisted in obtaining citizenship with the fees waived?
Prime Minister.
The former Home Secretary was absolutely clear about the offer that is being made to those people who were covered by the legislation, the 1971 Act, who came here to the United Kingdom before 1973. I'm sure that the Home Secretary will ensure that the case that the Honourable Lady has raised is looked into carefully. Often cases are raised in this House, and there is a complexity sometimes to cases that needs to be looked into very carefully, but I'm sure the Home Secretary will ensure that that case is properly considered.
Leo Doherty.
My constituency of Aldershot is the home of the British Army and has a very fine tradition of military service. And I'm delighted that today, Mr Deputy Speaker, the commander of the Aldershot garrison, Colonel Matt McGregor, and his wife Deborah join us in the gallery above. Next month, Colonel Matt will leave the Army after nearly 40 years' service. So could the Prime Minister join with me in thanking Colonel Matt for his service and the tremendous good works he does in the wider community of the Rushmore Borough?
Prime Minister.
Well, can I say to my honourable friend, I'm very happy not only to welcome the Colonel and his wife to the gallery to watch our proceedings today, but also to thank him for the significant service that he has shown our country in his time in our armed forces and all the work that he has done as commander of the garrison at Aldershot. And we wish him all the very best in his retirement from the Army.
Hannah Bardell.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. The Life Sciences Scotland firm Techno Pharma Services employ 50 people in my Livingston constituency. They test the safety standards of everyday drugs to ensure our citizens are kept safe. In their trade bill evidence, they expressed grave concerns about the lack of information and plans for Brexit. I met them last week, and it's fair to say their concerns have gone from amber to red. Life sciences in Scotland and across the UK are reliant on a harmonised regulatory environment. Patient safety is on the line, and businesses need answers from the Prime Minister. When will they get them?
Prime Minister.
I'd say to the Honourable Lady that, as I made clear in my Mansion House speech, the European Medicines Agency is one of those that we wish to discuss with the European Union, the possibility of us having an associate membership of. I and the Business Secretary and others spend time with the life sciences industry and with other industries, understanding their concerns, and we will be looking to ensure that we can provide the same level of interaction in the future that enables our life sciences industry not just to continue at the current level, but actually to be enhanced and to grow in the future.
Dr. Caroline Johnson.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Will the Prime Minister join me in congratulating the Bomber County Gateway Trust on approval of their plans for a full-size Lancaster bomber sculpture in the centenary year of the RAF? Does she agree this will be a fitting tribute to the service personnel, both past, present and future?
Prime Minister.
Can I say to my honourable friend, I'm very happy to join her in congratulating those who are looking for an appropriate commemoration in relation to the Lancaster bombing squad, to recognise all that was done by those who were involved with the Lancasters. But this, as she says, is the 100th year, the anniversary year of the creation of the Royal Air Force, and we should all across this House show our gratitude and support for all those in the Royal Air Force who have contributed so bravely to the safety of our country over the years.
Matt Weston.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Cretinous, crazy and certain other words beginning with CR are used by some members on the benches opposite, have been used to describe the Prime Minister's proposals for a customs partnership. However, credible is not one. Can the Prime Minister please explain how she sees this, given that so many businesses, particularly those in the automotive industry, and the likes of the CBI and the Chambers of Commerce, are so against this and prefer to see the continuation of a customs union affording truly frictionless free trade?
Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. As I said earlier, there are two options for delivering on the objectives that we have set. We will leave the customs union. We want to ensure no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. We want to ensure as frictionless trade as possible between the UK and the EU. And we want to ensure that we can have an independent trade policy. What I have to say is not credible to the honourable gentleman is a Labour Party policy that wants us to be in a customs union and giving all the power for negotiating our trade deals to Brussels with no say in it from the UK whatsoever.
David Evander.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Would my right honourable friend welcome the re-election of Bexley's Conservative Council? Congratulate them on their good record locally and look forward to their continuing to implement efficient and effective Conservative policies.
Prime Minister.
Well, can I say to my right honourable friend that I'm very, very pleased to welcome the re-election of Bexley's Conservative Council. I was pleased to speak to the leader of Bexley Council shortly before the elections last week, and I'm very pleased that the residents of Bexley will now be able to enjoy yet more years with a good Conservative Council delivering great local services at lower cost.
Matthew Petticoat.
Mr Deputy Speaker, despite the ever-present threat of death from both Syrian and Russian airstrikes, and in the face of smears and disinformation, the rescue workers of the White Helmets have never stopped saving the lives of their fellow Syrians. Last week, the Trump administration froze their US funding. With thousands of civilian lives at risk, will the Prime Minister step up, pledge the government to plug the funding shortfall that now exists, and ensure these heroic rescue workers can continue their work?
Prime Minister.
Can I say to the honourable gentleman, we recognise the very important and valuable work that the White Helmets are doing. They are, as he says, doing this in horrendously difficult conditions. They are incredibly brave to be continuing that work. We do support them. We will continue to support them. And my right honourable friend, the International Development Secretary, will be looking at the level of that support in the future.
Rachel McLean.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I ask the Prime Minister to join me in congratulating the 4 fantastic new Conservative councillors? from the Labour Party to the Conservative Party. And so can I ask her if her diary permits to visit Redditch at the earliest possible opportunity to back our fantastic local campaign to unlock...
Prime Minister, come on, let's get on with this.
Can I say to my honourable friend, I'm very happy to join her in congratulating those newly elected Conservative councillors. I had a list of councils earlier where people had rejected Labour, like Barnet and Dudley and Peterborough. I can add Redditch to that list, and indeed other councils around the country. Many congratulations to her, to those councillors, and all the volunteers and activists who work so hard.
Jeff Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. In the last year, the Trussell Trust has given out over 3,000 food parcels to my constituents in South Manchester, half of them to families with children. The Trust say that the government's flawed rollout of universal credit has fueled the 13% rise in food bank use over the last year. How does the Prime Minister explain that rise?
Prime Minister.
Obviously, the honourable gentleman knows that we don't want to see anybody having to use food banks. What we have done, what we did in relation to universal credit as we were rolling it out is listen to concerns that have raised, and we have changed the arrangements for universal credit as a result.
Robert Courts.
Congestion on the A40 in West Oxfordshire is a blight for residents. With developments, including the Cotswold Garden Village, set to increase demand, will the Prime Minister work with me to ensure that upgrades to the A40, to buses and to the Cotswold Railway line ensure that we have an integrated transport structure to keep West Oxfordshire moving?
Can I say to my honourable friend that this is an important issue that he's raising on behalf of his constituents, and I recognise he's absolutely right to do so and how important it is to them. Of course, at the budget we did announce money, £1.7 billion for the Transforming Cities Fund, delivering transport infrastructure for the future, but we also ensured that local authorities are able to bid in to over £1 billion of discounted lending to support high-value infrastructure projects. That's about us actually giving power back to local people, recognising the importance of infrastructure of the sort that he has recognised. He's raised some specific issues, though, and I know that my right honourable friend, the Transport Secretary, would be happy to discuss them with him.
Bill Estes.
When the Prime Minister told the nation she was on the side of the hard-working family struggling to make ends meet, did she have in mind a Britain divided across the generations, as described in this week's report by the Resolution Foundation?
Prime Minister.
The question of intergenerational fairness is one that we recognise, and that is one that I think the whole of society needs to recognise. What we need to do is ensure that we are helping young people get their foot on the housing ladder, help to buy and buying more homes, abolishing stamp duty for those many first-time buyers. What is important is that we make sure that we have jobs for people in this country, that young people are skilled and educated, trained to take on the jobs of the future. That's what our modern industrial strategy is doing. That's the best thing we can do. Ensure, as we are doing, that we have the policies through our balanced approach to the economy that provides the jobs and homes for those young people for the future.
Luke Brown.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Yesterday, the Scottish Affairs Committee heard from RBS executives. Given this publicly funded bank's blatant disregard for the local communities it serves, would my right honourable friend join me and strengthen the access to banking standard to give local people more of a say when banks remove vital local services?
What can I say to my honourable friend? I think it is important that we have put those access to banking standards in place, and that there are alternative arrangements in place that we have encouraged people to be able to take up to ensure that they are able to access the banking facilities that they need.
Holly Lynch.
Yorkshire Post has this weekend taken the unprecedented step of calling on the Secretary of State for Transport to resign, accusing him of repeatedly betraying our region over rail. Electrification is nowhere to be seen, trains are routinely overcrowded and delayed, and wheelchair users are left stranded when access lifts are broken or locked, all set against record ticket prices. Can the Prime Minister explain to passengers in Yorkshire when they will see a rail service which is truly capable of delivering the Northern Powerhouse?
Prime Minister! say to the Honourable Lady, we are putting record investment into rail across this country, and that includes investment in rail in the north. And transport, we are supporting Transport for the North, which is coming forward with proposals for the North. This is a government that recognises not just the importance of infrastructure, but the importance of infrastructure across the whole of this country.
Jezza.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Yesterday, along with our honourable friend for Romford, we launched a One Britain, One Nation all-party parliamentary group, which will be working with schools to promote pride in our country, respect, tolerance and inclusion, regardless of one's background. Will the Prime Minister join me in paying the tribute to the founder of OBON, Kash Singh, for the hard work he's doing to promote unity within our communities and our schools?
Prime Minister.
Well, can I say to my honourable friend, I think it is absolutely right that we pay tribute to those like Kash Singh who are working to promote inclusion, to promote unity in our communities. And it is important that we do see that those values of respect and inclusion, regardless of one's background, are ones that everybody recognises and practices. We have changed the law so schools have to actively promote our fundamental British values of democracy, the rule of law, of individual liberty, and mutual respect and tolerance for those with different faiths and belief. Because I'm very absolutely clear that nobody's path through life should be affected by their background or where they came from. It should be how far they go, should be how hard they work and their talents, and not their background.
A successful start-up forced into bankruptcy by government delays in paying out European regional development funds. A tech company's expansion plan stalled because government won't guarantee it access to the native European language speakers it needs. These are businesses I've spoken to in Newcastle in the last 2 weeks. So in the absence of any guidance from government on businesses preparing for Brexit, will the Prime Minister agree that Tory infighting is costing us jobs in Newcastle?
Prime Minister.
No, can I say to the Honourable Lady, she's raised a number of points. We've been clear about the support we're giving in terms of the funds that have previously come from the European Union. We've also been clear about the issue of citizens' rights for those people who are here in the United Kingdom from the European Union currently, and for those who will come here during the implementation period up to the end of December 2020. If she wants to be worried about policies that will affect jobs in Newcastle and the North East, I'll tell her the policies that would affect jobs in Newcastle and the North East. That's the policies of her front bench and her party.
Dr. Julian Lewis.
Does my right honourable friend recall that the previous Secretary of State for Northern Ireland suggested that the possibility of dealing with legacy cases by a statute of limitations coupled with a truth recovery process would be included as an option in the forthcoming consultation exercise? Does she accept that that is a legitimate option for consideration, and will she ensure that therefore it is not excluded from that consultation exercise?
Well, can I say to my honourable friend that this is a very important issue that he raises. At its heart is the support and gratitude that we owe all those who have served in our armed forces. Our armed forces personnel are willing to put their lives on the line for our safety day in and day out, as are personnel who work in law enforcement. And the peace we see today in Northern Ireland is very much due to the work of our armed forces and law enforcement in Northern Ireland. But we have an unfair situation at the moment. The situation we have at the moment is that the only people being investigated for things that happened these issues that happened in the past are those in our armed forces or those who served in law enforcement in Northern Ireland. That is patently unfair. Terrorists are not being investigated. Terrorists should be investigated, and that is what the government wants to see.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Waiting times for PIP tribunals in Wales have quadrupled over the past 4 years. My constituent, Alan McKittrick, is suffering with prostate cancer, angina, diabetes, COPD, arthritis, hernias, mental ill health, dizziness, blackout and ulcers. Yet his initial PIP claim was refused. He then waited 56 weeks for an appeal, which he won. Will the Prime Minister apologise to Alan, and when will she end this hostile environment towards sick and disabled people?
Prime Minister. to the honourable gentleman. Obviously, members across this House raise issues about the PIP process, and the Department for Work and Pensions is consistently looking at the whole of the PIP process. But one of the issues that he raised in his question was the health of the individual concerned. Now, as he sits for a Welsh constituency, I would have thought if he wants to talk about health, he should talk to the Labour government in Wales.
Order. Maggie through.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I recently visited a construction site for 85 affordable homes in Cotmanay, my constituency, which is benefiting from a £3 million Homes England grant. Will my honourable friend assure me and assure the House that she will continue to work with the new Housing Secretary to ensure that more people, like those in Cotmanay, in my constituency, will fulfil their dreams of home ownership?
Can I say to my honourable friend, I'm very happy to give that commitment to her. I think it is very important, and as I mentioned in response to a question earlier about the intergenerational issues, there are young people today who worry they will never be able to get a home. This government is committed to building more homes, but also to ensuring that we help young people to get their foot on the housing ladder. That's about what we've done in stamp duty, abolishing stamp duty for so many first-time buyers. It's about ensuring that we have put more money into Help to Buy. Helping young people to get their foot on the housing ladder is a commitment of this government, and we will continue to do so in her constituency and elsewhere.
Alistair Carmack.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The government has made a decent start at tackling the problem of our overuse of plastics, but we know that if we are going to get recycling rates up to where they need to be, then we're going to have to look at the production processes, a point that was made to me by pupils at Anderson High School in Lerwick on Monday. Will the government work with the plastic manufacturers to see what they can do to reduce the 50 different types of plastic that are currently in use, and in that way make it easier to sort and to recycle them?
Minister. The right honourable gentleman makes a very important point. We're making some progress on plastic, but we do need to work with the manufacturers about the production of plastic in the future. And that's why we are doing exactly that. And the Business Secretary and the Environment Secretary and others are talking to manufacturers about how we can ensure that plastic that is produced is plastic that will be recyclable and is not going to be plastic that just ends up in our oceans with all the problems that causes.
Alex Chalk.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Afghan interpreters who served alongside British troops did so with skill and courage. Can my right honourable friend confirm that those who have made their homes in our country will be able to remain, and that the ordinary fees will be waived as a small sign of our gratitude?
Prime Minister.
Can I say to my honourable friend that he raises an important point about Afghan interpreters who did serve, as he says, bravely alongside our armed forces. And I know that this is an issue that the Home Secretary has been looking at, particularly in relation to the fees for those particular individuals. It is important. Some people have been able to and wish to return back to Afghanistan and have been given opportunities by the government to retrain and to help to establish their lives there. But it is important that we recognise the debt that we owe them.
Melanie.
Crime in North East Lincolnshire is up more than 20%. Recently, we've had a single punch death, a serious blade attack, and an incident involving 200 hooligans that forced Grimsby families to flee our local seaside resort of Cleethorpes. Humberside Police have 310 fewer frontline officers, 550 fewer support officers than they had in 2010. Will she accept that her cuts mean that residents in Grimsby and Cleethorpes no longer have the fully funded and properly staffed police force that they deserve?
Prime Minister. I say to the honourable lady, since 2015 we have been protecting police funding. We have made available... This year we've made available £460 million extra to policing across the country. That is more than the Labour Party was committed to in its election manifesto last year. And as I have always said, and indeed as the Shadow Policing Minister has said, there is no direct link between the number of police officers and the issue and crime and the funding.
Order. Order.
Yes, Prime Minister's questions has come to an end. It is finished before 20 to 1. And it was presided over by the Deputy Speaker, Lindsay Hoyle, who kept order and kept the pace up and got lots of questions in and overran by the traditional amount by only a small number of minutes. perhaps partly because there were no long-winded interventions from the chair during this particular Prime Minister's questions, and no talk of medicaments or whatever it is often comes from that part. Anyway, thank you, Lindsay Hoyle. We've now got 20 minutes to fill, which is unusual, but never mind, we'll do our best. Laura Kuenssberg was right. Jeremy Corbyn did go on Brexit, actually raising a number of the questions that we raised in the first half hour of this programme, between the differing lines of the Foreign Secretary and the Business Secretary over the Customs Union or the government's preferred options to Customs Union. And Mr. Corbyn kept at it. His questions were short, certainly shorter than usual. Even his final question was shorter than usual. It tends to be long-winded. And I think the thing that's come out is that despite the short questions and straight to the point questions, there were very few answers. Indeed, I'm not sure there was a single answer to a single question. And I'm just glad to say that at least the House of Commons is no different from the daily politics when it comes to discussing things like the Customs Union. Anyway, we're going to review PMQs of the Health Minister, Steve Barclay, and the Shadow Treasury Minister, Annalise Dodds. They're still with us. And of course, Laura Kuenssberg is here too. Let me step back a bit from this, Laura. It was clear from what was particularly what Annalise Dodds was saying at the beginning, that on this issue of the single market and membership, which the Lords amended to keep us in the single market, the government will be able to reverse that in the Commons.
I think if you're talking about the single market in terms of the
Customs Union is a much bigger problem.
Absolutely right. So if you think about this as on the spectrum of how far along are the Remain rebels going to be able to push the government policy, I think in terms of the single market, that is not going to happen. The House of Commons all voted when they voted for Article 50 that we would be leaving the European Union, and most people's understanding on that point meant we'd be out of the single market, and both main parties said that in their election manifestos. When, as you suggest, it comes to the Customs Union, the government is on a much stickier wicket. There is no question about that. And that's part of the reason why the Brexiteers have been rattling the cage so much, because they harbour suspicions that actually the government will be pushed to accepting staying in the Customs Union. And for them, that is simply unacceptable.
It's a deal breaker.
It is a deal breaker for some of them. Now, I think, as we've discussed before, I've sat talking to government ministers who said, if we end up in that position, then I'm going to quit. I've told my whip that I would walk, and I couldn't accept that. But, when it comes to the idea of votes and is there a majority for this and a majority for that, you always have to think, what will be the dynamics at the time? So yes, right now, there probably is a majority in the House of Commons to get Britain to stay in the Customs Union.
You think there is?
I think if there was a vote in its sort of isolated, hypothetical sense, but that doesn't mean actually when it comes to the vote, and there will at some point be a vote, that the government would actually lose it. One's the hypothetical situation and one is the reality. But this calculation is something that is very much on ministers' minds. Do the Brexiteers then really mean it when they threaten to sink the government if they end up in a position of advocating for a customs union? Do they really mean that?
Well, even if they did mean it, even if they did it, even if they said, and we're going to get rid of the Prime Minister too, none of that would surely change the fact that they probably don't have a majority in the Commons for what they want to do.
So whoever was then in charge, say, for example, we play this parlour game, you ended up with a Brexiteer Prime Minister, they would struggle
face the same
very
problem.
deeply. Well, perhaps even they'd have a bigger problem in terms of getting their particular version of Brexit through the House of Commons. And we have this really interesting and sort of cul-de-sac situation, really, where there's such a disconnect between the decisions that the Prime Minister has had to make to ensure her own political survival day by day and what the consensus view in the House of Commons is. And the background to all of this is, of course, it's a minority government. She's had to tack this way and that and this way and that in order to be able to keep her seat. But in terms of whether or not she's actually able to get Parliament on side, that's a different question. And it's one of the problems that she's coming back to time and time and time again.
How long has she got now? Because she has played the ambiguity card for quite some time now, and it stood her in good stead in the sense that she survived. When there have been many times when we thought maybe she won't, but she has.
Yep.
But there's this big European summit by the end of June, I think.
June. The middle of the third week of June.
And the negotiations are meant to come to fruition by October. We know that Brussels empties out in August. France pretty much from Bastille Day, or Paris anyway. She has to make the ambiguity at some stage in the next month has to come to an end.
Well, you see, you
Or
say
not.
that, but we've said this before.
Oh, I know.
People have said before, well, she can't carry on playing off both sides. It's just not possible to keep going in this way. If you ride the bike so slowly, eventually it wobbles so much that you fall over. Now, at this occasion, it does seem that you have things that cannot be resolved. You have the government firmly saying, we will not ever propose staying in the customs union or a customs union. That has been her clear position so far.
The problem is, Laura, that these are all, they're all kind of distinctions without a difference for most people. Most people, the vast majority, whether they remain or leave, they don't know what the difference between the customs union, I'm not even sure they know what a customs union is. They don't know the difference between the customs union, and I mean, even Emily Thornberry had trouble with that, a customs union, or what is a customs arrangement.
Indeed so. And different politicians will give you different answers. So some Tory Remainers will say, well, the thing about a customs partnership, wink, wink, is that basically it can kind of be a bit like a customs union, but we just sort of call it something else, and pragmatically that's where we'll end up. Now, Number 10 would, of course, dispute that absolutely fundamentally.
Sure.
But then on the other side, you have some people looking at different definitions and taking on a different thing. And this is really a product of what we've just been discussing, the fact that the Prime Minister's understandable strategy for surviving has been to push decisions back and back and back and back and back and back.
But there comes a time.
There comes a time, and on the other side, you have Brussels looking at this from a very, very legalistic, technical, spreadsheet slide-driven, which is its way. And you have therefore the two sides on this negotiation coming at it from completely different approaches. And the Prime Minister unwilling, for understandable reasons, to force the confrontation inside the Tory party, where one side has to come out of the bloody fight at the end being the victor.
Another of the problems we have, Stephen Barclay, is that even if the British government could make up its mind, which I assume it probably has to at some stage, otherwise I don't see how it can negotiate, but it doesn't know what it wants. But we have no idea. Oh, well, actually, maybe we do. All the evidence suggests that of the two options, neither is agreeable to Brussels. Neither is agreeable to Mr. Barnier and the Commission. So this could be over an issue which, as I was saying to Laura, is very hard for people to understand. It's very technical. I mean, even economists I know find it difficult to work out the nuances of the different ways. But in there, Mr. Barnier might just say, actually, neither of these are acceptable.
Well, what the member states in Europe want is to continue trading effectively with the UK. They want to enter into an agreement with the UK on that. And what was interesting in Laura's remarks was she used the word disconnect. And I think what we're seeing in the House of Lords rebel vote last night, what we're seeing in some of the comments from the Labour front bench, is the disconnect with the democratic decision taken by people in the referendum who wanted us to take control of our laws and our borders. That wouldn't happen if you followed the vote in the Lords last night with the single membership, and it wouldn't follow if you followed the approach that Labour are talking about in the customs union.
Can I just ask you one question? When you were campaigning in the referendum, I'm not sure which side you were on, but can I just ask how many people said to you on the doorstep that they were choosing to leave the EU because they wanted to leave a customs union with the EU? Can I just ask you how many people said that to you on the doorstep?
Well, I campaigned for Brexit, and what people said on the doorstep...
So how many people said they wanted to leave the EU because they wanted to leave the customs...
I think it's condescending to suggest that people didn't know what they were voting for in the referendum.
I think they did. They were promised by the Leave campaign that we would keep those close customs relations. And actually, I think people do understand that. I'm not being condescending towards them at all. People do understand. They understand what additional paperwork would mean. I've got a huge BMW plant in my constituency. The workers there know what leaving a customs union will mean. It will mean customs declarations, huge amounts of extra paperwork, a just-in-time manufacturing system that will not work
And many of the voters
anymore.
in those manufacturing constituencies, often represented by Labour MPs that are now ignoring them, actually voted to leave.
Because
And they
the
were
Leave
given the
campaign
warnings of
told
Project
them,
Fear,
with
and they
respect,
voted to take back control.
The Leave campaign told them we could stay part of a customs union with the rest of the EU.
That was not what was said.
Well, I'm sorry, I was in very large numbers of hustings television programmes, and that's what they said.
In the election last year, what did the Labour manifesto say about a customs union?
We said that we wanted to be part of the customs union for the transition period. We said after then we wanted to retain close relationships with our customs union.
But you didn't say you would stay a member of it.
Of our customs union, we did say that we wanted to have that that close relationship, and we wanted to be in a customs union.
Everybody wants
to
a
be
close
in a customs
relationship.
union.
Did the Labour manifesto say we'll stay in a customs union?
I'm pretty sure that it did. It said we didn't want to rule it out, which the government
remember?
has done. The government has ruled out.
Fudgy.
It was.
It was pretty clear that depends what you mean by clear.
But
it was a bit of a
the
fudge.
difference is we didn't rule it out from the start. And that's what the Conservatives
Well, you
have
ruled
done.
out being in the customs union, as I understand it, in the Labour manifesto,
but our
as
customs
did the
union.
Cameron government in that leaflet on that. Now, I put to Mr Barclay the point that whatever his government finally comes up with, it seems to me it's highly unlikely that Mr Barney's going to say, yep, fine, thank you very much. Mr Barney, there's no evidence that he has any interest in what you're proposing at all. He's just as likely, just as he will probably throw back in their faces what they're suggesting, he'll throw back your idea too.
I don't agree with that. I actually think there's much more support for that kind of approach within the EU, certainly from people that I have talked to. I used to be an MEP before, from former colleagues. There is more interest in the approach that Labour has.
Hold
But
on.
let's
hold on. Let's remember, let's tell viewers what you're proposing. You're proposing that you will remain in a customs union and that you will have a say, over free trade deals done by the European Union with third parties, and that Britain will still be able to do its own free trade deals as well. I know of no leading member of the Commission or no leader throughout Europe who would agree to either of these propositions.
Well, I fundamentally believe that we would be in a better negotiating position where we would have more options if we hadn't, for example, from the very beginning, locked these negotiations into a zero-sum game, threatening the position of EU
Can you name one major
citizens
European figure that supports Labour's position?
If we'd been in that situation,
Yeah,
we
but
would
you're not.
have more options.
You are
well,
where
we
you
still
are.
could be. The government could still
Could you
adopt
name
a more
one
mature
leading
position.
European politician that agrees with Labour's position?
I think that privately there is a huge amount of support for having a more mature negotiation where you have a government unlike this one, which actually is clear about what its position is, which does not exhibit magical thinking, which this government has done, putting forward proposals that are manifestly unworkable.
Right.
There is support for having that discussion, and in fact we're quite regularly, the Labour front bench and others are quite regularly in Brussels having discussions and showing that there is a British pragmatic way forward, not the ideological approach that we've seen at the moment with
the fact,
government.
This is just rhetoric. It's meaningless. The fact is that the positions of the two major parties at the moment are not acceptable to Brussels.
And they both have problems internally over the stance that they should take. But in the bigger picture, Brussels is not enthusiastic about anything they've seen on the table from the UK in terms of how to fix this. The government has not yet resolved on its first preference, which nearly 2 years after the referendum is quite something. And there are whispers, and I say whispers, but there are indeed some whispers around the place that the only way through this may be to end up having a longer transition period.
Well, that'll have Jacob Rees-Mogg dancing in the
Well,
house,
you see,
won't it?
then the politics change. We'll
Would
be
you
out
put
of
up
the
with
European
that?
Union, but whether Brexiteers would
we've had this underestimating of the government's position before, and the Prime Minister has secured
would you
progress.
accept that? Would you accept a longer transition?
No, the government
If that's
policy is clear. We have
Yes.
clarity in terms of when the transition ends.
But
the
would you
point is
accept
if
a longer one?
Yeah.
No, the government
You
position
would.
is
So you
clear.
would. Okay.
So no, but the point is, John Thompson in his evidence to the Brexit Committee made clear what would be needed at the border. And this is presented presented as if it's a no loss from a European perspective. If you look at how the European position has shifted in, for example, financial services, where they started with a policy of derivatives, euro clearing would need on a location policy to go back to Europe, that has changed. On asset management, the
but we still don't actually.
So one needs to actually see that the
we don't know
negotiation is
that
playing through.
I mean, passporting is out, and we don't even know if we'll get equivalence. So
And
can I just say what the Labour manifesto said? It's on this. It said, we'll scrap the Tory Brexit white paper. We'll replace it with fresh negotiating priorities that have a strong emphasis on retaining the benefits of the single market and the customs union.
Yes.
Not the membership. The benefits.
Yeah, but to be fair, I haven't at any point in this programme said that Labour committed itself to membership at all.
I said that we began,
were wrong.
Constructive ambiguity.
I said that we were and we set out those 6 tests. Keir Starmer set them out, which are reflected in that manifesto, and we will judge any deal by that. I think it's important the Leave campaign is held to account, and certainly my constituents want that as well.
That all of you are held to account.
Absolutely.
On which note?
On which note we'll move on, because we know when we're beaten. The government says it will not implement the second stage of the Leveson inquiry into press standards. However, some MPs are trying to force a rethink, with Ed Miliband and Ken Clark adding a crossbench amendment to the Data Protection Bill, which would commit the government to finishing the inquiry. Remember, it was in 2 parts. We've had 1 part, but not the second. So is this an assault on press freedom or an essential protection for victims of press intrusion? So what are you in favour of? Should we have more regulation of the press?
No, we shouldn't. I think we need to value our free press. I think we have a formidable free press. I think it performs an important role democratically. It's important to preserve that at the local level as well. And I think many of those who have been speaking out about concerns with the vote tonight have been local papers who are fearful of the legal costs that would accrue.
Except that 85% of local newspapers are owned by 5 multinational companies.
Indeed, but that hasn't
They're
stopped.
not short of a few, Bob.
That hasn't stopped many local editors, local journalists speaking out about their concern that this legislation would have a chilling effect.
Would you like to see more regulation of the press?
Well, this vote is specifically about the continuation of the Leveson inquiry,
Yes.
as I understand it. And actually, David Cameron...
It's to try and trigger part 2.
Well, exactly, and he committed to doing that. And I think when we talk about this, we've got to bear in mind... Well, he's not, but he did make that commitment. And ultimately, we're talking about people who had very private information about them hacked. And I think they have the right to see what's happened there.
We've already
spent
£50 million of public money on investigating phone hacking. 50 million.
Well, it's
how much more do you want?
Well, I obviously don't want money to be spent inappropriately, but I do think it's important when people's private information has been accessed unlawfully, that is investigated properly, and that is government said what it would do.
People were arrested, charged, taken to trial. Some went to jail as a result of it. What more do you want to happen?
Well, we need to have the continuation of that inquiry. That's what government said it was going to do. And I think those
the law's already spoken.
Well, in relation to some aspects, but not all of them. That's why we need to see the rest of the inquiry, and that's what government committed itself to do, and I think that's quite significant and important.
Has the government got a majority to stop the second part of Leveson?
This looks a bit dicey, actually, for the government. It looks like this vote may well be in the balance now. Look, who knows? We'll see how the debate goes. But things have been quite tricky for the government and the Commons of late.
And the vote would be a second Leveson, but not by Leveson.
No.
It would be somebody else.
I believe so.
Do you fancy it?
Do you?
We could do it
Maybe
together.
we could do it together, Andrew.
We could do it
Maybe
together.
Who would be good cop and who would be bad cop?
Exactly. You get lots of support, I'm told. And you get to grill all these proprietors.
Well, the first one was on live television, so maybe we could do it on the Daily Politics. There you go.
When we did Mr. Murdoch giving testimony to the Select Committee of the House of Commons over hacking, it ended up me saying something I never thought I would say on live television. We interrupt this broadcast because Mr. Murdoch has just been hit by a pie man.
Foam pie.
I mean, you don't really get up in the morning thinking you're going to be able to say that on network TV, do you?
You don't. I had not got up that morning, tried to knowing I would be chasing after Rupert Murdoch with foam pie dripping from himself after that incident.
And Nick Robinson called it in his mobile phone because we had to cut it, and Nick's on the phone saying, "I can confirm it was a pie man that hit him, though it looked more like shaving foam."
One of my colleagues who did the right thing, chasing after with a camera, got a terrible telling off.
And then Mrs. Murdoch.
Me.
Seemed to whack the pieman.
Took him down. Former volleyball champion or something like
I'm
that.
beginning to warm to listen to. Memories.
That's all, folks.
I've been